Now we've got a lot of material to cover in looking at epithelial tissue, which is one of the four main types of tissue. So I'm going to try to do it as quickly as possible, but there is a lot of material, so this video could be a little longer. Epithelial tissue you find on your body surfaces that are external, so your skin would be epithelial tissue, and on any body surfaces that are internal. So they're going to be lining the organs, they are going to be lining the cavities within inside the body. And the job of the epithelial, or the function of epithelial tissues, protection. It's going to do a lot of protecting because it's the first thing you encounter. Immune defenses, it forms a barrier to keep microorganisms from getting into your body. And you've got a lot of immune system cells in your epithelial tissue. Secretion. Epithelial tissue makes our glands. That's what they're formed of. And so they produce substances like hormones and oils and sweat. And they secrete these substances either directly into the blood or through ducts that lead to the surface of the epithelial tissue. Also transport into other epithelial or into other tissues in the body. They form selectively permeable membranes, and some substances can passively just pass through these membranes. Others have to use active transport to get through. And then the last function is sensation, because they have a very rich nerve supply, and they're able to detect changes between the external and the internal environment. Your taste buds are sensory epithelial cells. Now, one thing about epithelial tissue that makes it a little bit different is it is avascular. Let's see if I can write this. That's an A, sorry. My finger doesn't write real well. Avascular. Now, if it's vascular, it's got something to do with blood. So avascular means without blood. There is no blood supply in epithelial tissue. It gets its nourishment from the underlying tissue that has a blood supply. Now, epithelial tissue doesn't have a lot of extracellular matrix. The cells are tightly packed together, and so that they form a sheet of cells. There are desmosomes and the gap junction, or tight junctions that you see there, connecting the plasma membranes of the cells together. And so they're pretty impermeable because they don't have a lot of extracellular matrix, plus they're more resistant to injury. Now, in looking at the graphic there, the epithelial tissue right here, all of that, sits on top of this underlying connective tissue. And so the epithelial tissue sits on top of it right here. You see how it's sitting there. It gets all its nourishment from these blood vessels that are down here, and it diffuses up into the epithelial tissue. The top surface of the epithelial tissue is called the apical surface. Now, as I said, it's avascular. There's that word, avascular. The extracellular matrix that's beneath the cells, it makes a very thin basement membrane. And that basement membrane has two parts. It's got the basal lamina, that's made by the epithelial cells, and it's going to make collagen fibers and ground substance. And then it also has the reticular lamina that's made by that connective tissue that's underneath, and it will make reticular fibers and ground substance. So those two layers form the basement membrane, and they glue the epithelial tissue to that underlying connective tissue. And they anchor the blood vessels in place and keep a barrier between epithelial tissue and underlying tissue. So that basement membrane is a characteristic you see in epithelial tissue that you're not going to see in other tissues that we have. Now, to classify epithelial, we're going to look at how many cell layers there are and the shape of the cells. If it is simple, it is one layer thick, one layer. And the reason you would have simple epithelium like this would be for diffusion of substances, like in your lungs, in the air sacs of your lungs, you've got simple epithelium. And it's very, very thin, so it's easy for, when you have a gradient, for oxygen to diffuse to the area that has less oxygen. Stratified epithelium is going to be more than one layer. So this is stratified, and it's a protective barrier in any area that takes a lot of mechanical stress, like abrasion and rubbing. You're going to have this protective stratified epithelium. So that's classifying it by the number of cell layers. The other way to classify it is by the shape of the cells. And there's three main shapes. Squamous, like that one right there, is flat, like a scale. Some people say squamous. So if we looked at this tissue right here, that is simple squamous epithelium. One layer of flat cells. Cuboidal looks like a cube. And columnar is tall and thin like a column. Now, because epithelial covers and lines body surfaces inside and outside, then things have to move through that epithelial tissue. And there's two ways. The first is paracellular transportation. And with paracellular, they leak between the cells. That's all it does. It's leaking between the cells. Transcellular means it has to cross the cell membrane, go into the epithelial cell, go all the way through it, and cross the cell membrane on the other side to get all the way through it. So transcellular, it goes through the cell from one side to the other. Paracellular, it just goes between. That's what para means, is between. It goes between the cells. Now, the first type of epithelial tissue is simple squamous. As you see this single layer of flat squamous cell making up that tissue. It's in a sheet. It's adapted for diffusion of substances, and you find them in the air sacs of your lungs. And when you look at this picture, you're looking at just this top layer, just the top layer. The rest of that is the underlying connective tissue. Simple cuboidal is the second type of epithelium. It is one layer of cube-shaped cells. You can see the basement membrane there around that. You see it all the way around it. And of course the apical surface would be out here. Okay? This is also thin enough for diffusion. And you find this in some of your glands and your respiratory passages. Simple columnar is one layer of column-shaped cells. And you notice that all the nuclei are close to that basement membrane. And a lot of times the cells will have that microvilli on the top that you see, and they have cilia on them, and that is to move substances across that apical surface, because you'll find cells that exist in simple columnar that make mucus, and they are called goblet cells, and they'll be down here and they look like a little goblet, and they'll secrete mucus, and then the cilia will sweep it around so that the whole apical surface has the cilia there. And you find these in cells of your small intestine and in some of your respiratory tract segments. Pseudostratified columnar epithelium. Pseudo means false or fake. So it looks like it's layered, but it really is not. It is only one cell layer thick. You see, here's your basement membrane, and you can really see those goblet cells there. You see them that make them? That's an example of a one cell functioning as a gland, and they make this mucus, and then it moves up here, and the cilia sweep it all over the apical surface. You find a lot of this in your respiratory tract and your nasal cavity. Pseudostratified. So we've talked about 4 types of one-layered epithelium. Simple squamous, simple cuboidal, simple columnar, pseudostratified columnar. Now,